Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
I'm Seth.
And I'm Matt.
Nice. And we're the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
I always forget to say that when we have guests on, which
I know,
is like
you
the
always
thing we're
forget
supposed to say, but whatever.
I know, you can't close out the intro, and you're just bad at everything. Bad at life.
Wow. That's what happens when we have guests on.
I know. I get real punchy. I think the best part is that some of our listeners don't actually believe that Zach and I are brothers. I think that this is actually just a shtick that we do for the show. Which is not. We are in fact brothers, which is why I can rip into him, but I won't rip into you, Matt. We appreciate you for coming on to the show here.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. This is great. This is awesome. We were talking so much. I was like, we might just have to press record, or we're gonna miss out on some quality content here. I mean, we're just. Otherwise we'll talk for like 6 hours and be like, wow, we really should have hit record at some point. I mean,
we did a whole podcast before.
We pretty much did, actually.
So once again, thank you, Matt, for coming on to our show, coming all the way out from the great Pacific Northwest over to our fair city, and joining us in the Classic Gaming Brothers studio. We have cleaned since our last guest was here, who was also named Matt.
Perfect.
That's right.
We had one Matt with.
If we could find a third Matt, we're gonna be good.
Yeah,
just keep that track record going. In the end, there can be only one.
That's right. We're gonna have you all fight. That's what we'll do. Is we'll bring all the Matts in together.
Like the Josh fight.
Yeah, like the Josh fight.
Josh fight. That was like the most ridiculous thing I'd ever. I was like, what is this? And just on Twitter, and it's like all these people. I was like, okay.
It was building for a long time. I was very disappointed in my friend. I have a friend named Josh, and I was very disappointed that.
Where was it held? It was held in like some
it was like some field.
It was like but it was like in North Dakota. Or it's like, wasn't it? It was like it
was something
like Utah or something. It was like some like middle of nowhere state, I think, right? Wasn't it?
It was Lincoln, Nebraska.
Lincoln, Nebraska. I mean, I guess it's in the middle of the country, right? It's like, hey, let's all. Yeah. That way it works for everybody, except those people in Alaska. It's like, hey, buddy, I got
900 people there.
Is it? It's close to the center of this country.
They were not.
I don't know. I mean, I've New England perspective.
Yeah, Nebraska's like right in the middle. That might actually be like the middle, I guess, of the continental United States. Probably right there.
I think it is, yeah.
I can tell you right now, there was not social distancing going on, okay? There was a lot of people in that field.
Of social distancing. Anyway, yeah, thank you again, Matt, for joining us. So, Matt, you host a wide variety of podcasts, but especially Box Trick.
Yep.
And a bunch of content out there. Is there, I guess before we begin, do you want to just plug anything real quick?
Sure,
or, introduce yourself as you can?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, follow me anywhere on the internet at SuperGainsBros. But yeah, I do run a video game podcast called Box Trick. Just sort of a retro gaming podcast. I bring my friends on. We just sort of pick a subject, and then we pick usually 2 to 3 games each, or we'll do a top 10. Sometimes it's like, hey, favorite games from Capcom, favorite games from Nintendo. I would say probably the majority of the topic is we talk a lot Nintendo, but definitely a lot of retro games, sometimes new stuff. So that's probably where most people, I would say, that are, if you're listening here, you know me from. But I do run a few other podcasts as well, sort of like fantasy book reviews, stuff like that. Bend the Knee, it's a Game of Thrones podcast. Here's the Horn, it's a Wheel of Time podcast. Hyperspace Hangout, it's a Star Wars podcast. I mean, the list just goes on, guys. But yeah, nice. It's what I do pretty much 24/7. So outside of playing games and trying to squeeze in a workout after work. So
nice.
And we'll put all of the podcasts that Matt would like you to know about in the show notes.
Yeah.
we'll keep the secret ones that he runs.
Yeah, the hidden podcasts.
Yeah, those podcasts are only for fans. Okay, guys. So just joking. Yeah, just joking. But
no gods, no kings, only fans.
Only fans. Yes.
And so now we actually originally found you through Box Trick, being that is the gaming one, and the logo for Box Trick is Solid Snake sneaking out from under a box. My assumption is that you must have some enjoyment or love for Metal Gear, because that is where Solid Snake is from.
Yes, that is 100% correct. Although we will get into it. I guess technically it's not Solid Snake; it's a big boss that is sneaking under the under the box. But yeah, we could get to that when we get to when we definitely start talking about all of the Metal Gear. But yes. So the name Box Trick comes from the fact from Metal Gear Solid 2 specifically, where one of the characters, anybody who's sort of seen anything with Metal Gear Solid, you've seen that's kind of like one of the main sort of like memes or things about it, is you have this super soldier who like sneaks around in a cardboard box, and so it's like, people are like, I've seen that trick before, and it's the box trick, and so that's
and there it is. That's wow, that's fun. I like learning where names and logos come from. It's like it's a hobby of mine. So it's always fun to hear those things, especially since ours is pretty basic. But
it works. Hey,
sometimes
you people know exactly what they're getting. It's great.
That's right. It's and nothing more. That's, you get exactly what you get. Speaking of people getting what they get, we should just talk about what we've been playing. And as the process dictates, we will defer to Matt. So Matt, what have you been most recently been playing?
I was looking at sort of the show notes here, and I was like, all right, well, I better narrow in on one thing, because I do on my YouTube channel, I do just a lot of reviews of games, and so I was like, well, technically I've been playing all this stuff. Then I was like, what have I actually been playing sort of recently for fun, not like working on a review or something like that? And yeah, so I have been into Bravely Default 2 for the Nintendo Switch, which is it's a role playing game. Anybody who played Bravely Default 1 was on the 3DS, and then there was a sequel for that called Bravely Second, and now we have Bravely Default 2, which is sort of its own game. It's not tied to Bravely, Square Enix. It's the way they title things.
They're just weird.
It's like, hold on a second. It goes Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but then you figure out that, well, depending on sometimes when you look at it, 3 is actually 6 and 4 because of the way it was licensed, and then it's like, hold on a second. Then there's 10 too. It's like, but that's not Final Fantasy 12. It's just what they do.
It's not 11? No, it's not 11.
No, it's not 11,
it's
man.
10 too.
It's 2, all right. And then there's
and
Final Fantasy 13.
All very different stories.
Totally different stories, yeah. So, but the Bravely Default 2, it's Clay TechWorks is actually who developed it, published by Square. But it's a lot of the team that worked obviously on the Bravely Default games. It's some of the people that also worked on Octopath Traveler. If you're familiar with that, and then they have
Octopath Traveler.
Yeah, then they have a new upcoming game. Right now, I think it's called like Project Triangle Strategy, right? These ridiculous names that they're coming up. But those two games use that sort of, hey, let's take like basically a Super Nintendo RPG, but like put it sort of if it were in HD, and then that's what it looks like. They just showed off the Dragon Quest 3 remake that they're doing that's going to be using that same engine. So it's a lot of that same team. Although Bravely Default is a little more sort of it's not 2D. It's a little more 3D, but it's this sort of I always really appreciate the art style in it. It's this it reminds me of like storybooks. Like if you like the old sort of like storybooks from back in the day. If you've ever played a great RPG that I really love from Ubisoft, Child of Light. It's almost as if Child of Light was 3D instead of on a 2D plane. But it's pretty standard sort of fare. It should be a Final Fantasy game because it's 4 heroes, crystals, trying to save the world. Now you're pretty standard fare. But I would say what makes this game sort of unique is the battle system. If you played Octopath Traveler, Octopath uses the same battle system from Bravely Default, where you can sort of save up turns. In this, it's called brave or default. So if you brave, basically you can go 2 times in a row, but then you'll have to wait a turn before you get to go again. Or you can default, in which you can basically sort of wait a turn and defend. But then the next time you could go twice and it doesn't cost you a turn. And so that's sort of the key mechanic in it. And it works really well. There's also a job system. So, you can build different classes and everything like that. What makes it really fun fun is sometimes it's worth it to be like, all right, well, I'm going to max out my turns and go like 5 times in a row because I need to take this guy out like right now and stuff like that. So it's a huge part of the game. And yeah, the first was on the 3DS, first and second one on the 3DS. It's all that sort of same battle system, but it's great. So far it's great. I'm not incredibly far into it, but man, I'm enjoying it. I'm glad I picked it up earlier this year.
Nice.
Yeah, that's I really liked Octopath Traveler. I saw my friend playing it on his Switch, and I was like, oh, that looks like it's like my jam. So I was a big Final Fantasy VI fan, so I like the different characters that have all the different stories and like uncovering that like million different stories of all these different divergent characters who come together at the end of the day to complete a story. That kind of like motif is my jam. So yeah, so Bravely Default, which is not Octopath Traveler, but it's similar-ish.
It's similar, yeah. It's definitely similar, yeah. And I think I prefer it more than Bravely Default 1 and Bravely 2nd.
So they've made improvements, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I think going from the 3DS to the Switch in itself is just a
jump.
Yeah, is definitely improvement too.
So Zach, do you want to go next?
Yeah, why don't I? So I was trying to come up with a game that I wanted to play recently, and I stumbled across the CD that I just had from a Goodwill. I'll just get into it. I've been playing this game called Pack Guy, which was originally released in 1996 by Astral Entertainment and distributed by ValueSoft, and later it was bundled on a CD-ROM that I stumbled across recently in around the late 90s, so like 98, I think.
Is when you stumbled along the CD?
No, that's when the CD was released. I stumbled upon the CD like last month. So the game, I actually originally played Pack Guy a long time ago at my friend's house. He had it on this like Windows 95 computer that they had in their den, and we would just sit there and we would just play it over and over again because it was a really short game. You can just like run through it. And I just assumed I made it up after I played it a lot with him. Like many years passed and I was in college and I was like, that game was fake, right? That was not a like real thing. Like I hallucinated that or something. But no, it was real because I found it at a Goodwill, like on CD, and I was astounded that it existed. So I popped it in recently and I gave it a shot again. Pack Guy is a Pac-Man clone, as the name implies, but it's these really like small, really crappy mazes that you have to explore. And you also shoot at the enemies as opposed to like collect a power pellet and like gobble them up. You just blow them up. You collect dots to win each level as you would expect. My favorite thing is I was introduced to a lot of great music through this game because all of the music is stolen from other places. So it's like music from Star Wars, Chips Challenge. It has like the canyon.midi sound from like the Windows 95 like system files buried in there. It's just this bizarre mess of a game that apparently existed, and I definitely recently played it, and I don't know why I did. You know what? It's one of those games that is terribly, terribly awful, but it's just really addicting to just play over and over again because it's just so silly.
I just clicked on it, and I'm listening to Under the Sea from Little Mermaid.
Yeah, yep.
Like,
there's
what?
A whole level that it's just Under the Sea. At one point you go to a bar, it's just the cantina music, and you shoot Greedos.
We should give you a spoiler alert, Matt. Zach plays really bad games.
I like playing really, really bad games, or just weird games like
Mace Griffin Bounty Hunter.
Mace Griffin Bounty Hunter.
You must be playing this on an old PC. I'm
not actually. So the wonderful thing is I popped the CD into my Windows 10 computer. It booted on start.
What?
It just booted fine.
It's from like 1996. Like, how does that even
The CD
work?
itself has to be from like 98 or 96. I mean, it says Windows 95 on it. I mean, maybe it's a later release CD because it has like their website, but I mean, their website's in the 90s. It's just like, it's so weird. I'd expected that it wouldn't run when I bought it, and now I popped it in, and it just like, it boots in a weird resolution. It's really tiny, but it still plays. So whatever.
Recently, I've been playing Time Spinner by Lunar Ray Games, and it was published by Chucklefish, who are the same people who publish like Stardew Valley and all those. They're a pretty great publishing house. And the game was released in September of 2018 and is like an action platformer. You play as this character who is what's known as a time spinner, who is somebody who uses time to protect their people. And essentially what they do is they go back in time to prevent bad things from happening, and then they're forgotten about from the rest of their people. It's interesting in regards to like the concept. It's essentially the time spinner role. The job that you take is kind of like a very martyrish type of position where you kind of do it for the betterment of your, for your society, and then you go back and you have to go through and you platform around in the game. It's very like 8-bit type of graphics, and it's a side-scrolling type of situation, and you attack using either a magical orb type of melee attack or a spell. So, and you get like one spell that you can change out. And it's got a very like almost like a JRPG type of menu system in regards to like your equipment, there's leveling. So there is like role-playing elements to it. But the way that I've been playing it, I always kind of just felt like it was more of like an action platformer. But that may be also because I'm not really paying attention to what's really going on in the game. But it's got kind of cool bosses that you have to encounter, and you get cool little time mechanics as well. So you eventually unlock the ability to pause time, and then instead of so there'll be enemies in the field. If you hit the enemies, you'll get damaged. You can attack the enemies, and then you can pause time, and if the time is paused, you can jump on the enemies using them as like a platform. So there may be places in the level or in the area that you're in that you can't get to unless you use a time mechanic to like jump on a bird that's flying by and then use that to jump going further. It's been a lot of fun. It's great. I like I've been really into playing games with a controller. I've had my like Xbox controller going on, and I've just been playing them on the PC. It's kind of one of those games where you can kind of sit back and kind of just relax and go through, and it's not like super involved. I tend to play a lot of adventure or strategy games, so playing a game like this is a little bit of a shift for me. And yeah, so it's a really cool game. So the art style reminds me a lot of like Owlboy, and the gameplay is kind of I have like Braid feel to it, but mostly because Braid's a time game and this has time mechanics, though it's a little more involved in regards to like the story. There's like a story that goes along that's structured. There's no real paths that you can take in the story. Like the story tells itself kind of regardless of what you do, but there's still like kind of like a story element to it. So it's Time Spinner by Lunar Ray Games, and it's been a lot of fun. It's
nice.
Yeah, I'm looking at the gameplay footage now. Chucklefish does such a good job with their animation, because I have to say a lot of indie games or whatever, you use that the 8-bit style it doesn't feel 8-bit, right? With the exception of like Shovel Knight. Okay, that looks like it could be on the Nintendo. But they do a great job, especially of like Stardew Valley and stuff. Like this game looks like 100% like it could run on the Super Nintendo or like the I mean, it looks just ripped straight out of it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that Metroidvania type of a game.
Exactly. Yeah, very Metro. I so fun. I've actually haven't played a lot of Metroid or Castlevania, and that's mostly because I was raised on a diet of Sega Genesis, where we had
me too, man.
Sonic and Sonic and more Sonic, and I played a lot of Jungle Strike.
So good.
So, but those type of games I'm like kind of discovering now as I kind of go back as young early 30s man, going back and going through the old games that I didn't play as a child, that I'm like, oh, these are fun. I wish I played this when I was impressionable and not old and cynical.
Have you ever hit a game going back now, especially with like emulators and stuff like that? Have you ever hit a game where you feel like I was doing like going through like all the Game Boy Advance games, because I was working on like a top 100 like Game Boy Advance game list, and I came across F-Zero GP Legend, and I was playing it, and I was like, this is great, but at the same time I was kind of like a little sad, because I was like, man, I would have really loved, like I could totally have seen myself playing this nonstop as a kid. And so do you guys ever feel like when you go back and you find some of these old games, like you're almost like, I wish I would have loved this game as a kid, but you never got it, you never got a chance?
Yeah, absolutely. I
most
have that
most games for the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
Like
I actually kind of self-defeat myself when I go back to playing older games, because I don't necessarily have the attention span to like stick through a game. So I'll use like heavy save slotting if I really want to try and get through a game, and I don't really have the time to suffer through it and actually playing it. So like I'll like flash save and like save right before things and get through the games. I feel like there are games that I'm exposed to now that I was like, if I played this as a kid, I would have really liked it and I would have played it for hours and hours and hours and hours. And now I'll play it and I'll be like, I'll play an hour of it, but there's like so much. I feel like when I was a kid, my game library was something that I could overcome. Like it was something I had like 4 games, 10 games. That was enough, and I could play them all, and I could like try and beat every single one of them or get pretty far in them. Like I played a lot of like Toxic Crusader for the Sega Genesis. Zach and I tried playing that during Extra Life when we streamed back in November, and we couldn't do it. We couldn't get past the 2nd level, and we're like,
a hard game.
It's hard, but like when I was a kid, I used to be able to do it, and now I just feel like with the amount of games that are in my collection, I just don't have the attention span to like be like, oh, I'm gonna play this game for like 80 hours or that it requires, and it's not even like it's not even Mass Effect. It's like some other like it's like a shoot 'em up. I'm gonna play like 40 hours because that's what's required, and I can't do it. I'm like, all right, I've got something else, and just blast through it. But yeah, no, 100%. It's because of its age, really. It's and time. I think there's media saturation. I'm gonna blame it. Media saturation.
Well, there's
too much media.
There's always that next game coming. You're just like, oh my god, like I want to play that, and I want to play that, and then you pick it up and you just put it down. Yeah, pick it up and put it down.
Yeah. There's solid games that have come out that I was excited about, and I've played them. And I mean, I feel like there's 2, right? So there's like this game that you're really excited about coming out, and it comes out and it doesn't meet its hype. And then you're like, this is disappointing, because it's just like, and it could get like review bombed right before, and I feel like when it gets review bombed right before it comes out, it can sour it. Because I was really excited for Empire of Sin, and John Romero, and it was just gonna be great, and it was like it got review bombed, and it was just like mixed reviews, and I went into it, and like you read those reviews before you go into it, and you start thinking about what they said, and it just is like then you notice certain things about it, and then you're just like disappointed. And then you have like the games that you're excited about coming out, and they come out, and you're like, this is amazing, and you take time off of work to like play.
Yeah. That's probably Spider-Man was probably the last game where I was like, I was just like super sucked in and be like, okay, like I need to like take a day off work for this. Like it's just so good. Yeah.
So as we kind of alluded to earlier, we have Matt on the show with us today. He's going to be speaking with us about a game that Seth and I really don't have too many like solid memories on because of our history with games, and also just because we were bad at playing games on systems that we didn't have growing up, and that is the Metal Gear games. But yeah, so I mean, before we get into Matt's memories, I think briefly to talk about Seth and mine. I mean, I don't know if Seth has any memories of Metal Gear at all.
I don't have much memories. I mean, period. Like you could just include Metal Gear in that. I just don't have many memories. But I do have some memories of Metal Gear. Most of them were involved with visiting some friends in, I want to say, high school, and it was the later versions of Metal Gear. So we're talking post the original. We're talking like the PlayStation ones. Yeah, the ones that had cinematics. That were, you could watch them do things. Because I saw some cinematics. Primarily my memories though were like somebody like wrapping up a Metal Gear game. So like I would like be coming over to my buddy's house and they playing Metal Gear, and like I would be there now. So then they would save and not continue to play Metal Gear because that is a single player game. So they wouldn't just be like, I'm playing this game now while you watch, because that I would leave. Like that's just it's like we'll do like a cooperative game or something. So I've seen like some cinematics from it. I'm like aware of it. I know that there is a box and that he hides in it. Like, but that's pretty much my understanding I know it originates, like, it was made in Japan and then it was ported over and brought over to the United States, and I'm familiar with like the dial. I'm like, oh, those like dialogues where it's like they're like the pop-ups where they're talking to each other. Like, I'm familiar with that. So I'm like, I would say that I'm familiar with Metal Gear as a brand, but I'm not necessarily familiar with it as an experience.
I mean, for me, I was introduced to Metal Gear through probably early YouTube and stuff like that, from watching streamers and stuff or not streamers, but like YouTubers talk about it. I think like James Rolfe talked about it briefly in one of the old AVGNs going back. But really, I got into learning about it through one of my roommates in college who was wicked into it, into the series, and had just gotten Metal Gear Solid 5, or I think he at least had Ground Zeroes. I think Ground Zeroes had just come out when I was in college with him. And I like just sat down and just watched him play a couple of the other games because he was replaying them through, I think it was the HD collection on PlayStation 3.
Yeah, there's a handful of those, yeah.
So then I decided to learn more about the game, and I was like, oh, cool. It was originally on the MSX, ported to the NES. So I tried playing the MSX version. It's very hard, but I did play a little bit of it. I've also played a little bit of the NES version via a cartridge I have that has just a bunch of like games built into it. It's like one of those multi-carts. Also not an easy game. Like the NES version is equally not as hard, I would say, as the MSX version. Still a hard game. And then I actually played like a good chunk of Metal Gear Solid 5, even though I haven't played any of the others, because I got it for free through PS Plus. So I was just like, yeah, I'll play Phantom Pain. And I played through like maybe like 3 hours of Phantom Pain. So I'm not that far. But like, you know, a substantial chunk of the beginning cinematic. I really enjoyed it. I was like, this is a blast. So at some point I need to get back into playing through the originals, or at least play through all of MGS and then some of the other ones. But that's my personal experience with Metal Gear.
It's great. Yeah, I mean the Metal Gear franchise itself it's so big. There's a lot of games. There's so many entry points into the franchise as well, which is something I really like about it. You know, like the NES version, actually. It's kind of, we can get into the history if you guys are ready. If you guys are ready to dive in, or do you guys want to hold off on that just a second?
Well, I'm interested, before we get into the history of the game and the facts, as it were. I'm actually interested in how, like, why Metal Gear? Like, why? Well, how did you get into it? Like, what's your history with it personally?
Okay,
and then
so the first one I ever played was the demo of Metal Gear Solid, and I played the heck out of it because I was like, this game is amazing, right? Like, you're in Shadow Moses, you have to sneak in. It was like nothing I definitely have ever played before. But I never really played the first game for a while. Then I got a PlayStation 2, and one of the first games I got was Metal Gear Solid 2, which is in my top 5 favorite games of all time. It's not even the best Metal Gear Solid game, although, to be fair, all of the Metal Gear games, if you go to Metacritic, I mean, they're all 10 out of 10 games. You know, it's kind of like the Legend of Zelda franchise. It's like one of those things where it's like every game is so highly rated that when you start ranking them, it's like, look, it can be the 10th best Metal Gear game, but that still means it's better than like thousands of, you know, other games. Yeah. It's like ranking the original Star Wars trilogy. Which one's your favorite? It's like they're all amazing movies. Just because I like this one the best doesn't mean that movie sucks or anything. It's just, you know.
I mean, empirically, Empire Strikes Back is the
right.
best.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not like A New Hope is a slouch or anything. I mean,
right.
And so Metal Gear Solid 2 was really my entry point into it. And, you know, I mean, one of the things that Hideo Kojima, right, the series director, and it's impossible to even talk about Metal Gear, the franchise, without talking about Hideo Kojima, who's, you know, pretty widely considered to be, you know, one of the top 5 video game developers ever. I mean, Shigeru Miyamoto has to be number 1 just because, I mean, he literally created like Mario, Zelda, I mean, everything. I mean, so he's got to be number 1, right? And then, but he and Shigeru Miyamoto were friends growing up, which is crazy, right? Like they were like, they're like school buddies. But so Metal Gear Solid 2 was my first entry into the series. And one of the things I think we don't really appreciate as much anymore now as we did then was, like, you know, the jump from PS3 to PS4 and then the jump from PS4 to PS5 is nowhere close to the jumps that we used to make, right? Like
Yeah.
going from Sega Genesis to Sega Saturn, I mean, it's an enormous jump in terms of capability. And then going from like the Saturn to the Dreamcast, or you're talking like going from the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo is a huge jump in terms of what you're able to do. The Super Nintendo to the N64 is like, oh my God, this is crazy. So same thing, going from the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2, you're talking about a enormous leap in terms of graphical capabilities, the things that you can do. You're going from CDs, which are like 700 megabytes, to DVDs, which are 4 gigabytes. I mean, so Metal Gear Solid 2 is like, there's so many great cinematics in it. It's like full on CD quality music. The graphics are so much bigger and better. I mean, the jump from PS1 to PS2 in terms of graphical capabilities is such an enormous leap. So when you're playing Metal Gear Solid, pretty much all of these games, it's the story that really grips you. And the story is like the most complex story like ever told. I mean, the Metal Gear Solid story across the whole thing is so absurdly complex. It's like impossible to even explain. I mean, it's so well written. Like if they were ever to turn it into like a movie or something, I mean, I think it would win awards. It's literally that good. But so you're playing and it's just the animation, everything is like, it feels like a mega, like big budget movie as opposed to just a game. And I think that's one of the reasons the Metal Gear franchise itself is always regarded so highly, is because all of them feel like you can tell it's like a big budget game.
Yeah, which and even the original was developed by Konami, and Konami's they're not foreign to making video games. Like Konami has put together some of the best games out there, and I'm always surprised by Konami because they always like sneak in. Like it's always like somewhere along the lines you're like, wait a minute, that was actually done by Konami. Like it's they sneak in. I mean, beyond doing Metal Gear, they also did like a number of platformers.
Konami in the back in the sort of NES Super Nintendo days, and then in the NES and Super NES days, Nintendo had a cap on how many games a publisher could develop. So sometimes if you're playing an NES game and it's developed by a company called Ultra, that's actually a like subsidiary of Konami that they had to use as a bypass. I even think some of the Contra I think is like is an Ultra game. I know that Metal Gear is an Ultra game, but it is actually Konami. But yeah, I mean, Konami back in those days, it was like, I mean, they did all the great beat 'em ups, Turtles in Time, the Batman games, stuff like that. They were great.
I mean, I'm sure they put some slags out, but a lot of the stuff they put out was gold. And I think Buster Bust Loose, Tiny Toons Adventure, Buster Bust Loose was a Konami
either
platformer.
Either Konami or Capcom, because Capcom yeah. I think Capcom had the Disney license.
So I think one of them was Capcom, and then there was one that was
that's Warner Brothers.
The Cat.
So that's Warner Brothers. So that's not Capcom. You're right. That is probably Konami.
I think Capcom did there's like the Danger the Cat or whatever his name is.
Yeah, Bonkers.
There we go.
He had a TV show.
Yeah. Yes, he did.
The Bonkers platformer on the SNES was Capcom, and they ripped like a dash mechanic from the Konami Tiny Toons platformer. But yeah, anyway, sorry, that was a little deviation.
That's okay. That's okay. Absolutely.
I was recently playing Tiny Toons Adventure Buster Bust Loose.
It's great. So it's a super hidden gem. It is a total hidden gem.
Anyway. Metal Gear. So yeah, let's get into the history of to Metal Gear here.
Let's dive into it, right? So Metal Gear sort of started. Hideo Kojima is the developer, published by Konami. The original game in 1987. It came out on the MSX, right, home computer system, which was really big in Japan. You pretty much playing in either of the games in the entire series as either Solid Snake or Big Boss, who we will get into a little bit here. And then it was ported to the Famicom and the NES. There was a sequel on the NES called Snake's Revenge, which was sort of published by Ultra, but it's not canon. There is Metal Gear 2, which is released on the MSX. After that, the game series moves into the PlayStation realm, right? Sony PlayStation is Metal Gear Solid, and then since then, every game after that has been called Metal Gear Solid in terms of the main series. There are some side games. There's Metal Gear Acid, Metal Gear Rising, and a few others which are sort of side games, but the majority of the games
Survive.
Oh god, let's hold off on Survive. Okay, let's just hold off on Survive. But yeah, so the majority is you're going to be playing as Solid Snake, right, who is this sort of super soldier. You're almost always infiltrating an enemy base. There's some mechanics in these games, right, that has sort of become meme worthy, or sort of things that most video game players recognize, right? Like if Snake is seen, you'll get that sort of single exclamation mark that appears over his head that you've been identified, and then you have to sort of escape.
Oh, and there's the boop, the alert noise, right?
So the original Metal Gear Solid, which is the third game of the series, right, released on PlayStation 1, 1998. It is often considered the best game on the PlayStation. I mean, most top 10, top 100 lists, Metal Gear Solid is almost always in the top 10, if not always sort of number one, to be entirely honest. It's almost always up there. So that is sort of how a large majority of the games work. It's stealth intration, stealth espionage action, or tactical espionage action is usually a tagline that's somewhere on any of the boxes of the games, and that's sort of what Hideo Kojima is going for with the games. So that's sort of just a brief sort of history, and then we can really dive into some of the more intricate things about each of the games, and there's a lot of really cool sort of Easter eggs and little nuggets about them.
Oh, absolutely. I have a lot of questions. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
So, all right, I think my first question is, there's Solid Snake and Big Boss, right? Like,
yes, what's
going on with that?
Okay, so that's not even close to the that's like the most surface level thing. Yeah, so
that's the beginning of the iceberg.
That's a great question. That's sort of a great place to start. So I would say chronologically, the way to play the series, which I think is actually a good way to play it, is and I'll give you a sort of very brief sort of story guide, right? The first game in chronological order, which if I were recommending anyone who's going to jump into this, I think this is actually the way I would do it, is I would start with Metal Gear Solid 3, which is, I would say most of the hardcore fans would consider this to be the best game in the series. Came out late PS2. It pushes the PS2 to its absolute maximum limit. I mean, it is, but if you want to play it today, the best way to play Metal Gear Solid 2, there's a Xbox 360 collection, there's a PS3 collection, there's actually two PS3 collections. There's the HD collection, which is on both the 360 and the PlayStation 3. Then there's the Metal Gear Solid Legacy collection, which is the PlayStation 3 only collection, which comes with a handful of more games. We'll get to Metal Gear Solid 4, which is the reason there. There's even a Vita port of Metal Gear Solid 2. It's like one of the only reasons I really want a PlayStation Vita at some point, just so I can play Metal Gear Solid on the go. And it was released on GOG.com last summer. So that's a really, really, really good way to play it. So I would say the best place to start is Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, and we can get to some of these things. The games have been sort of ported and more of enhanced director cut versions, so you may see like Subsistence, some of these things surrounding it. That's the version you want to go with. The first game, Metal Gear Solid 3, takes place in the 1960s. Like we're talking Cuban Missile Crisis is what's going on. They use sort of some real life story elements that's going on. We're talking, it's like the Cold War, and then they sort of things kind of, they kind of influence things, and then the original characters will take place. I'm trying to think, like, so some of the, so like I think JFK was a president in this, right? Like, that kind of a thing. But then, like one of the other characters will become a president at some point. But sort of the main sort of just is during World War I and sort of World War II, the world leaders of China, Russia, and the United States kind of came together and saw that they basically need some way to sort of, they pull all this money together and they create this thing called the Philosopher's Legacy. It's like these super aristocrats, and it sort of creates this shadow government, and that's kind of the big overarching sort of behind the scenes things that's going on. And then that's sort of your main kind of villain ultimately throughout the entire thing. And it shifts power, and, you know, all of these things go through with this sort of shadow government. At some point it becomes this group called the Patriots and all of these things. And they're basically trying to control the world through the shadow government. Your main character, Jack, whose name, who is Big Boss, is basically the world's first super soldier in a way. He's just a really good soldier, but he doesn't have anything special about him. He's like the perfect soldier who's ever lived.
Being called Big Boss just makes me think of like Pawn Stars.
Right. So it's how he gets the name is really interesting. So his mentor is a character known as the Boss, who was at that point the greatest soldier who'd ever lived, right?
I gotcha.
Okay.
It's like a mantle.
Yeah, exactly. And so he has to go in. So the first Metal Gear Solid 3 takes place in Russia. You're sort of sneaking through, trying to stop this character named Colonel Volgin, who is developing it's the Shagohod in that game, but it's basically this sort of super armored tank that has the ability to launch a nuclear weapon from it. That's sort of the other thing. All the Metal Gears, basically, they're these robots that have the ability to launch nuclear weapons, and its governments are trying to build these Metal Gear weapons so that they are now the premier power in the world. So to not give away super any spoilers with that, in that game, as he's called then, Naked Snake, and the name, there's a lot of snakes and things go back and forth. Naked Snake goes on, you play through the game, you stop the Shagohod, you then have to fight the boss, and I won't get into the reasons behind that because it's so epic and so good. You end up defeating her, and then the United States government bestows him the name Big Boss because he is better than the boss.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so then you play sort of as Big Boss through Metal Gear Solid 3, Metal Gear Portable Ops, which is a game for the PlayStation Portable, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, which was on the PSP, and that game pushed the PSP to its max, and it was later ported to the Xbox 360, PS3, and those collections. Then you get to Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes and Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, where you're playing as Big Boss. People who've played the game will just leave it as you're playing as Big Boss. I don't want to give away anything else, but you're playing as Big Boss, and at this point in time, Big Boss is kind of creating his own sort of military organization where they're basically challenging the Philosopher's Legacy, right, which is this big consortium of money that is trying to create this shadow government to try to rule everything. He's taking them on. At this point, their name is Cypher, but it will later change to the Patriots. And so he's sort of taking them on by building up this huge sort of military force so that they can sort of fight for the world and to make it a better place and to rid the world of nuclear weapons is sort of what's going on there. At this time, though, the Patriots, we'll just call them from this point on, had started a project in which they had tried to clone Big Boss because they said he's basically the world's best soldier that's ever lived, to make more of them. And it's called Les Infantes Terribles Project, which stands for like the wicked children or the terrible children is what it roughly translates to. He has 3 surviving sons, one of which is Solid Snake, one of which is Liquid Snake, and one of which is Solidus Snake. So he has these three children.
There's no gaseous Snake?
No, Solid. Yeah. So then you move to Metal Gear after Metal Gear Solid 5, and this is where you begin playing the games as Solid Snake, who doesn't know it yet, but he is the son of Big Boss.
The NES version.
The NES and MSX. Yeah, so Metal Gear is the first game in the franchise.
But it's after the 5th game in the franchise.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it plays all over the place. Yeah, so now you move to Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2. Both times you're playing as Solid Snake, and then you sort of go in, try to stop another Metal Gear. Every game there's basically another Metal Gear. Some new organization is building this massive sort of weapon that they want to use to have reign supreme, right? And you have to go in and shut it down. But then at the end you end up fighting Big Boss, and he's sort of a villain that gets sort of skewed as you progress later on, and you begin to sort of uncover some more things. Metal Gear Solid.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, so Metal Gear Solid, the first PlayStation game for the original PlayStation, you're Solid Snake. You're going in to Shadow Moses, which is sort of like, I think, what most people are familiar with when you're talking about the Metal Gear franchise. And you have to go shut down Metal Gear Rex. And this time you have to take down not Big Boss, who's presumed dead because you've defeated him twice now. You have to go take on Liquid Snake, who you find out is your brother. And so that's kind of the setting for that game. Then you move to Metal Gear Solid 2. And this is where Hideo Kojima does something kind of interesting. So you're playing Metal Gear Solid 2. It's split up into two parts. You play as Solid Snake in the first part. It's 2 years after Metal Gear Solid. The Navy is now developing its own Metal Gears, and they're going to start mass producing them. And you play the first part as Solid Snake. You move to the second part, and you're playing as a new character named Raiden. This was kind of divisive amongst fans, but I like Raiden, and he's kind of whiny in Metal Gear Solid 2, but he gets turned into like the coolest character that's ever existed.
Which is great. It gives you like a rising action, right?
Exactly.
So if you have a character that develops, it's always more interesting than a flat character.
Exactly. So in Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden's a little whiny. This time you're taking down Solidus Snake, who is the other brother, although he has a lot more connection with Raiden. And then you shift to Metal Gear Solid 4. And again, it's one of these things where this franchise is so good, it's hard to really say which is the best game. Like, I could make an honest argument for just about all of them as that's the best game in the franchise, and here's why. Metal Gear Solid 4 it's one of the ones that I'm most intrigued by because it was a sort of launch window game for the PlayStation 3. And now we're talking about, we're going from the PS2 to the PS3. This was a big jump, right? The PS2 to the PS3 was a big jump. Not been as big jumps because we went from DVD technology, 4.8 gigabytes or whatever, to Blu-ray technology, 50 gigabytes. And Hideo Kojima wanted the game to be put on 2 Blu-ray discs, like as a launch title. And Sony said, no, you are in no way making this game on 2 Blu-ray discs. That's like a launch title. I will say this, Metal Gear Solid 4 is the one game in the franchise I would advise anyone not to play first because it's the end of the entire franchise. There's one game that comes after it, but it's sort of a side game. And that's Metal Gear Rising, where you play as Raiden, who's like now like some sort of like cybernetic ninja thing.
It's got a cool sword.
Exactly. Yeah. But so Metal Gear Solid 4 is the ending to the whole franchise. It quite literally has cutscenes that last over half an hour. I mean, that's not. I mean, quite literally has cutscenes. I think the final
cutscenes I think is over an hour.
I think it is. I think the final sequence might be an hour and a half. That's not a joke. I mean, that is not an exaggeration. The thing I appreciate most about Metal Gear Solid 4 is there are moments in this where you have Metal Gears fighting each other. There's a part where Snake, who's now old at this point, has to crawl through quite literally like a laser microwave type of thing. You have a fist fight on top of a Metal Gear, but nothing comes close to being as epic as the final cutscene, which is just a conversation between two people in which like every secret you've ever wondered is sort of revealed, and it's just a conversation between two people standing in this graveyard, and it's like so symbolic of the whole franchise. It's so epic and amazing, and it is entirely worth all of the other games you've ever played. The build up to the culmination to the end of the story, hands down, I think it is one of the best endings to any video game ever. Like, if people were disappointed by spending hours and hours and hours in Mass Effect, go play Metal Gear Solid and you'll be like, that is exactly how an epic masterpiece is supposed to be ended.
My favorite story about Metal Gear Solid 4 comes from my friend who told me that when he first finished the game and was going through that final cutscene, he like started the cutscene out, watched it, was watching it, and he's like maybe an hour passed, and his dad walked in and said, "Oh, what movie's this?"
Yeah.
and he was like, I don't know.
There are cutscenes in that game, some that are like, and like it was like early PlayStation, so you had to like install it. You had to like install the game in sections in order to play it.
So to recap, if somebody was to go through Metal Gear Solid 3?
Yeah, I would. So yeah, the order in which I would play them is even though the gameplay sort of shifts and the mechanics and stuff sort of shift because you're playing, you're going from like PS3 to PSP to PS4 to whatever. The order in which I think I would play it to get the best sort of story out of it is I would start with Metal Gear Solid 3, then you play Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, which is PSP only, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, which is on a handful of things, Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes, which is like PS3, Xbox 360, Xbox One, PC, stuff like that. Metal Gear Solid 5. In all honesty, the two games you can really skip are Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. The MSX games, really. And actually, those are playable. Both the MSX versions are playable on any subsistence version of Metal Gear Solid 3. They're on there. So if you're playing it on PS2 or Xbox 360, any of those, they're loaded into that game as well. But really, you could skip those if you really wanted to. Like, in terms of story, like, you'll pretty much be told what happens, like, in the games afterwards, because there's like briefing sections you can do before you even go in. But if you're gonna do it, do Metal Gear 2, Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 4, and then Metal Gear Rising is the order.
And skip Snake's Revenge.
Snake's Revenge is totally not canon. Yeah. There's a handful of side games. There's Metal Gear Acid, Metal Gear Survive, and it was the first 10 out of 10 IGN ever gave was Metal Gear Solid for the Game Boy Color. It's a side game. It's really good, obviously. It's an amazing game. It was the first 10 out of 10 IGN ever gave, but it is a side game. You don't have to play it. And then Metal Gear Solid 1, you can play it on PlayStation, but if you're gonna really want the best, I encourage people to play Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes for the GameCube. There was a GameCube remake of it, which is really, really, really good. It's a very, very good remake of it. It is incredibly difficult to find in the wild, and if you go to some video game store where they know what they're doing, you're going to be paying well over $100 for it.
Fair enough.
That's good. I've wrote the list down for myself, and it'll be also good for our listeners to have a good the matte cut version of Metal Gear, as it were. To talk about a little bit about the gameplay, it's a stealth game, right? You control the character, whoever it may be, in whatever iteration of the game that you're playing.
Right, Snake.
You're attempting to avoid.
We just leave it as Snake. Yeah, and then you're covered.
And you're going through facilities that have bad guys in them, and you're trying to avoid being caught while trying to activate objectives. So like the game that comes to mind when I'm thinking about it that I do have familiarity with is like a Splinter Cell version.
Yep.
But I feel like Metal Gear is a little more silly than Splinter Cell, or is a little more is fun, I guess, or like it takes itself a little less seriously
at times. Like, it's definitely at times, because it's one of those things where it's like there's definitely a lot of moments where it's like it gets a little ridiculous and a little silly, but I mean the story is definitely a serious story. So it bounces around, and it's paced very well, I'll say this. And so the comedic relief stuff that when it comes in is definitely like a breath of fresh air sometimes when it happens. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely like fun ways to do it. I think it adds to it. And a lot of that stuff you have to search for. It's like sort of Easter eggy stuff like that. So when you find it, it's like, oh, that's really cool. I'm glad I found that. But yeah, you definitely don't have to do that stuff. But veterans of the series know where a lot of those things are, and they're very well placed, and they're very fun.
Do you have any favorite Easter egg in the series?
Oh wow, man, where'd it even begin? Yeah, Metal Gear Solid 3 I think is the one that probably has the most fun Easter eggs. So because fans, as I told you, there's a character in Metal Gear Solid 2 named Raiden. There is in Metal Gear Solid 3, you have your codec conversations. Like, that's when you see the two screens and you're calling each other. And and trust me, there's like hours upon hours of those. And you can call it for guides, like tips, like, hey, like, what am I supposed to do here? Type of a thing. You can talk to different people in your like intel team. But yeah, so one of the things is, there's a lot of pushback about Raiden in that character because he's not Solid Snake. So when you start Metal Gear Solid 3, you actually get a mask that looks like you're playing as Raiden. And you can put it on and you can call people like on your team, and like one person on your team is like, yeah, I made it. It's really lifelike and all this stuff. But other people, if you keep calling them, they get upset. They're like, will you take that thing off? Like, no one likes it, like stuff like that. And it's really just like, there's like a lot. There's definitely a ton. There's a ton of in-jokes throughout the whole series. It's super fun.
And there was a Metal Gear game. I think we mentioned it, but I don't know if we didn't talk about it specifically. It was like an MMO survival game.
Metal Gear Survive.
Survive, yeah. So that came out. what is your? It kind of reminded me of like Fallout 76.
Yeah.
Kind of, like,
so I think the issue with Metal Gear Survive isn't Metal Gear Survive as itself is an okay game, and it runs on the Metal Gear Solid 5 engine, which is great, and sort of just it's sort of like a base building thing. It's a total side game. It's like zombie thing, and it's a ton of it is fun in terms of what it is. It's kind of like a Metal Gear Solid 5 sandbox, which I think is cool. The problem with it comes from a lot of the sort of behind the scenes stuff with Metal Gear Solid 5. So Hideo Kojima, so Konami itself, let's start there, in the past 5 years or so has undergone some really sort of big internal changes. They've made a strong push away from a lot of their core video game franchises, which are deep, rich, great series. Castlevania, Silent Hill, Metal Gear Solid. I mean, these are like, well-established video game franchises that people love. And they've made a stronger push towards mobile and pachinko, which is sort of this like, it's like a gambling type thing that's done over in Japan. And so what happened was, reportedly Metal Gear Solid 5 was costing a ton of money, and Hideo Kojima kept delaying it, and they were having internal struggles. And so Metal Gear Solid 5 in a lot of people's eyes is actually not even a completely finished game. There's tons of source code that alludes to like one final chapter in the game, like a handful of missions that we never got. I think it's fine. I mean, it's still got like 10 out of 10s and everything. I think the story itself works and serves its purpose, but it is interesting to see some of the content that we could have gotten. And so I think people's issue was that it felt like Konami was just doing a cash grab, when it was like what we wanted was that final chapter of Metal Gear Solid 5, and what we got was some sort of zombie game because Call of Duty is doing it and making a bunch of money. So I think it's far less to do with Metal Gear Survive as itself, and far more to do with its timing and placement and when it came out, and the internal conflict that Konami is having with Hideo Kojima.
And to dwell a bit, I think, on that whole Kojima split, I might be wrong, but wasn't Ground Zero supposed to be like part of the complete package for Phantom Pain, and Konami essentially forced them to split them into two separate games?
Yeah, and then a really sort of big moment was at the probably whenever Metal Gear Solid 5 came out, 2015, 2016, around that time, 2014, somewhere, I don't remember the exact year that it came out, but the Game Awards that year, right? Kiefer Sutherland, who voices Venom Snake, is the snake that's in, in the title in that game, Big Boss. They finally replaced David Hayter, which was also, people were really interesting about that, because David Hayter is like the classic voice of Solid Snake. I think it was a good reason, and that's just because Snake's getting older, and then if you were to ever go forward and you're going to have Snake versus Big Boss, you're going to need two different people to voice them.
Yeah, you can't. David Hayter versus David Hayter.
Right, for it to make sense. But yeah, in the Video Game Awards, it's a pretty big deal. I mean, Jeff Keighley, or whatever his name is, the guy who hosts the whole thing, basically went off on Konami on stage live because Metal Gear Solid won an award, and he was like, it's ridiculous that he's not even allowed to be here legally, and like basically told Konami off in that thing. And it was like, this is a big deal, man. And so and we don't know, and now the sort of the status of Metal Gear is really, really up in the air. There's a lot of rumors that Sony's going to try and step in and buy it. There's rumors that Microsoft, who's been on a tear with buying franchises, they just bought Bethesda, might buy Konami. So we will see. I would not be surprised actually if Konami at some point started selling off assets and made a total shift.
I would be very happy if that happens, because I feel like having someone else at the realm of at least maybe something like Silent Hill, or maybe giving Kojima Productions back control of Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear, that'd be so good. Because good. Death Stranding is really cool and very neat, and is a very Hideo Kojima game, but I would like to see it's not Metal Gear, and I would love to see,
which he can't do.
I would really love to see Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear like completely uncut, like just uncensored Kojima, like anything that he wanted in the game that Konami said no to before, just let him do it. And that's what I want to see in a game.
Yeah, I hope that the entire company of Konami doesn't get bought. I think it would be better for sort of gaming if they sold assets to different companies, and then you had different companies coming in and buying things. Like if Microsoft would get everything, I think Sony is clearly the people who I feel would be best suited to own the Metal Gear franchise. And then from there, the rest, like maybe From Software can go in and buy Castlevania, and we can start to get like some, like a Dark Souls type Castlevania game, or I think Capcom would be the best to step in and buy Silent Hill. I mean, they're so good with the Resident Evil franchise, and then you could take that in its own direction and stuff like that.
I mean, it's kind of interesting when companies kind of, because this happens regularly with like video game franchises. These video games companies kind of get to where they're either they're pivoting corporately, or they're like going defunct, and they're not doing anything with an intellectual property. And then like one day the intellectual property just gets bought up, and like these new games just come, and they're like XCOM is a good example of that. Like XCOM was just out in the winds, not doing anything, and then all of a sudden like just like they just start crushing out really good games. And I actually really enjoy that, because I feel like it's obviously like those who grew up with the franchise will have an affinity for it, so you'll get that nostalgic buy right immediately, but you'll also be able to introduce it to like a whole new crop of gamers, right? If they roll out a whole marketing and branding for a new generation, and make it a kind of like a new Metal Gear for the people who are playing games. I think that Metal Gear is a very intimidating franchise to get into, and it's kind of, unfortunately, in my opinion, like especially with franchises like Metal Gear, so you're set, right? So there's not really any new Metal Gears that are coming out, and the age of the software is getting older. So as the age of the software and the technology advances, newer and younger people aren't necessarily going to pick it up, because it's not the thing that's demoing with their newest system. It's something that is like, oh, like my dad played Metal Gear, like, or like my older brother played it. So something like where I think in order for the intellectual property to survive, Konami either needs to do something with it, or they need to get rid of it. They can make a lot of money off. Like at the end of the day, if Konami looks at it and is just like, we're not, like, they're just sitting on probably maybe even $1 billion, right? Just like of asset that they could just be like, oh, do you want to do Metal Gear stuff? We'll sell it to you for $1 billion or whatever. That's like the price of Microsoft bought Bethesda for. I know Bethesda and Metal Gear are entirely two different like scope. Bethesda's a game publisher, but like they still paid a lot of money for Bethesda.
Yeah, I mean, Konami itself, doing a rough translation here, is maybe a $10 billion company. Yeah, I mean, I know Apple has $200 billion cash on hand right now. I mean, right now, Apple has $200 billion cash on hand. So I mean, I'm sure that Microsoft, I don't know its exact cash on hand, but I'm sure it's probably pretty similar. So I mean, they could buy like 20 Konamis in a day and be like, well, whatever.
Just put it in their stack of game developers that they've bought. Yeah.
And I think what really needs to happen with Metal Gear, at least, is Capcom has a really good model right now where they just release a new Resident Evil game, then release an old Resident Evil game remade, and then they just like continue that cycle. And honestly, like if you had someone at the helm of something like Metal Gear, Kojima at the helm of Metal Gear, and was able to just remake Metal Gear Solid using updated, an updated engine, or remake MGS3 with an updated engine, remake Metal Gear, completely from the ground up, I think that would be amazing, while also producing new content. I mean, it's obviously something that can be done, and I think Capcom's at least proven that it's a good model. I mean, yeah, Resident Evil 3 didn't get a ton of positive reviews by some of the fans, but I mean, it still sold really well. So I mean, that's the bottom line, is they're going to make money doing it. And I mean, as we can see from at least the popularity of something like RE2's remake, that market is out there.
Yeah, I'm looking back here, because Konami themselves, they just have so many things. I mean, so many franchises that because they don't produce anything, people totally forget that they own these franchises. I mean, they own Gradius, Castlevania. So it's like Castlevania. It's like we haven't even gotten a new Castlevania game, but we did get a cool anime on Netflix. It's like, okay, well, I guess that's the route they're going. Silent Hill, Contra. The only thing we've kind of gotten is like Bomberman. We have gotten a few Bomberman
everyone
games.
wanted.
I know, exactly.
It was Bomberman.
It's the best game on the Turbo Graphics.
I know. Bloody Roar, which is one of my favorite fighting game franchises, and I hope someday we get another one of those, but I find it incredibly unlikely. I mean, if we can't even get Metal Gear Solid, which is by far their biggest, that I would say Metal Gear, Castlevania, and then you can Silent Hill, probably Contra, and then it goes down after that. But I mean, if we can't even get a Metal Gear game, how are we gonna get Bloody Roar? I mean, that's never gonna happen.
The real question is, where is Rocket Knight Adventures? Give me
Seriously.
Rocket Knight Adventures.
Sparkster, Rocket Knight Adventures.
Give me that Sparkster.
That's my first ever game that I ever played as a human was Rocket Knight.
It's great.
I love Rocket Knight, and yeah, it blends into that Konami mascot platformers where it's just like, here, play as this character and go through the world with some mechanics. I think we've beaten Metal Gear. As a topic.
We are running we are still shorter than the final.
Yeah, we are so close. I told you guys. Sorry, I said you guys were like, well, we usually run around 45 minutes. I was like, I don't know about that today, guys. I think we're gonna.
And we have one more segment to go, but we did beat Metal Gear Solid. We did use the walkthrough of Matt to get through the Prima strategy. We'll just have like a Prima strategy guide.
Actually, I like Brady games. Remember the old Brady games? Because my last name is Brady, so it's like, there you go. So it's the old school Brady games. Yeah.
I was always partial to GameWinners.com.
I used what was it before? It was, now it's like something Radar or something like that, but it used to be like Cheat Code CC or Games Radar used to be like Cheat Code CC or something like that. It was like something weird. Yeah.
I'm a game FAQs.
Mm-hmm. Game Facts.
Game Facts. Yeah.
I still some days want to like send these guys emails because they like wrote like novels for some of these, like especially like involved role-playing games. You get to like a walkthrough and it's like, here's a 300-page like walkthrough of like detailed instructions for every step of the way, and I'm like, somebody decided that they did this and then they published it for free. Like, it's just like, you have to really, the amount of like love for a game and the desire to share that knowledge is, some people just, they have it. And like, I always think about like being like, I should write a walkthrough, and then I'm like, no,
it's too much. It's too much. It's not worth it.
It's way too much, and I'm like, I can't even beat the game, let alone walk through somebody. So just for the original Metal Gear, to kind of circle back, it did sell well, since we like to do some financial information for our listeners. The original Metal Gear was actually ranked in the top 20 best-selling games in Japan for 5 months, where it was number 4 in 87 and peaked at number 3 the following month, or in October, so then 87 November. The Nintendo Entertainment System's version, the NES, was a major success. It sold 1 million units in the United States and was the top selling game in the United States during October of 1988, just below Super Mario Bros. 2. So it was the second top selling game in the United States during October 1988.
Not bad for a game that was made by a guy who didn't even want to go into video game making to begin with.
That's true.
And then I think Metal Gear Solid 2 is the best selling game technically in the series, with just over, it's about 7.5 million, which has it just about so a half. Yeah, but I think one of them was the best selling game on a system. Anywho, we can continue. Sorry.
Now we will get to our final section, where we will talk about games that we are excited about buying, waiting, or passing on. As tradition dictates, Matt, would you like to take us away with a game that you are excited about buying, waiting, or possibly passing on?
Yes, and I thought I would go with a game that I am excited about buying. So next to Metal Gear, I would say that my second favorite video game franchise is easily the Legend of Zelda franchise, and this year marks the 35th anniversary, and to probably a lot of people's displeasure, we are getting The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword is getting a port to the Switch. It was originally on the Wii. When it came out, IGN said that it was the best Zelda that had ever existed. It was better than Ocarina of Time. They have since, I think probably walked that back, obviously, because
they're shills.
Yeah, I mean, so I love. First of all, there's no Zelda game that I dislike, except for obviously
it's
the
like
ones
me and
that,
Sonic.
Except for the ones that don't count, like Wand of Gamelot. Nothing that's certainly out of the canon sort of Zelda. But I love Skyward Sword, and I think that now that you're going to be getting the improvements of being able to play it on the Switch with sort of a different sword mechanic, I think people are really, really going to appreciate it because they're going to be playing it for the first time. The only issue is that you're going to be playing it now having played Breath of the Wild, which to me is might be the greatest video game ever made, because the way I view it is, if Ocarina of Time is the best video game ever made according to Metacritic and just about everyone, and I like Breath of the Wild more than Ocarina of Time, I think that makes Breath of the Wild the best game ever made. By that logic, I think I like it even more than the second highest rated video game ever on Metacritic, which, if you guys didn't know this, is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. I mean, did you know that?
Great game. I believe it.
Did you know that Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 is the second highest rated video game ever? And I like Breath of the Wild more than it. So it's like, okay, I like it more than 1 and I like it more than 2. So yeah, so its sort of issue is that it's coming out, sort of against Breath of the Wild if you view it like that. And I think that's going to kind of cause some people to maybe not like it as much. But when it came out, I mean, it was the first time we sort of had almost voice acting. There's not like full voice acting in it like there is in Breath of the Wild, but it really pushed the Zelda series in totally new directions. We get sort of the stamina bar, which was not anything before. I really love the graphics of this game. I love the art direction. These sort of like pastel colors, I think works really, really, really well for it, and I think it's going to look that much better on Switch. If you look at anybody playing it on Dolphin in like 4K, stretching it out, it is a beautiful game. One of the best Zelda soundtracks, I will say, and you get crazy. You get the origin story of Zelda. I think it has unique dungeons and everything. So I think people are going to be playing it and they're going to be like, wow, maybe I overlooked this game when I had to play it on the Wii, but now that I can play it without motion controls, I think they'll appreciate it more.
Oh yeah, I think that's actually one of the things that I had a friend who really liked Skyward Sword when I went to his house, and I was like, you have to do a lot of really weird motions to get this to make the sword move. I'm like, that's
what appeals to me about it is I have a Switch Lite, so I pretty much have to get games that aren't motion controlled, because otherwise it's just awkward. Like when the Mario HD collection came out, I just opted not to get it because, well, one, I didn't see the appeal in it. Right. But the bigger thing was that I would really only be getting it for Galaxy, which I haven't really played a lot of, and I wouldn't be able to play Galaxy because you needed to have the motion control for the Switch to play it. So I was like, I literally can't play the game. So yeah, there's no point. But now that I know that Skyward Sword has an option that allows you to not use motion control, I'm like, yeah, I'm all for it, because if there's a way I can play this game, I'm playing it, So yeah, that's awesome. So the game I'm excited about by waiting or passing on is Lego Star Wars: The Skywalker Saga, which is due to come out sometime this year, we hope. It's been one of those games that's like, I think it was supposed to be out a few years ago, and then it got delayed, and then it was supposed to be out last year, and then COVID, and then it's supposed to be out this year, and now we're not really sure. But it's due out sometime this year. That's the idea. Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga is the new Lego Star Wars game that's a combination of all 9 Star Wars movies, everything from Phantom Menace to The Rise of Skywalker, developed by Traveler's Tales, who've worked on the Lego games since the beginning back in 2005. I remember picking up the first Lego Star Wars game for GameCube, and then I got the original trilogy the year when it came out, the year later, also for GameCube, and I thought the coolest thing in the world was that you could combine saves. I was like, that's so cool. You just went into a setting in Lego Star Wars 2, you pressed a button, and all of a sudden you have access to all the characters from the first game. And I was like, this is the coolest. This is like lock-on technology from Sega Genesis. This is like Sonic and Knuckles, but for the GameCube. I thought that was the wildest thing. This game looks fantastic. I mean, I think the Lego games have since changed a lot, and this game looks like it's has changed significantly from the games of old. But I think it's it's a logical progression in terms of how it changed, and I think also it's a change in terms of what the gameplay looks like that I'm excited for. We're a little more action oriented, at least from what the trailers I've seen have been, but also still keeping with that Lego charm and aesthetic. The one thing I'm really excited about though is that I heard that there is a mode that they might be putting in that changes all of the dialogue into the like Lego speak from the original game, where like they just kind of make like noises, but they don't actually talk. So apparently they either are planning to put that in or have already put that into the game. I thought I heard that. If that's the case, I'm definitely buying this game because that Lego speak is just hilarious. It's just Legos grunting. and like I remember in the original game, or in the original trilogy game, when like Vader is trying to tell Luke that he's his father but doesn't actually use dialogue, he like pulls out a family photo and like points to it and then points at Luke and then points at himself, and Luke is just like like shocked face. Like it's just that kind of game. I love that kind of humor, and I expect to see that in a Lego game. So I'm gonna put it down as a buy. Yeah, Lego Star Wars: The Skywalker Saga.
All right. So my game that I'm excited about buying, waiting, or passing on is a game called Space Transport Tycoon by a company called Hubel. It is a transport trade type game, and you have to go through and build like a tycoon, a company up, and you have to try and become the best space tycoon in a very sci-fi / cyberpunk style world. So you have to, and it involves not only doing all the tycoon aspect of the companies and stuff like that, and transporting of the goods and figuring out where to buy and sell, but you're also designing and building your own spaceships to deliver the cargo, and you can even design luxury liners and bring people around. It is a to be announced type game, and it looks interesting. I'm kind of looking in my life for the next generation of the game Gazillionaire, which is a buy and trade simulation game that is very basic. I don't know if Space Transport Tycoon is the game that will be that. I am not sure based on where it is. It looks like a game that I would be interested in. Especially it looks like you can walk around your ship, so I don't know if they're biting off more than they can chew, but overall it looks like an interesting game. I'm definitely going to put it on my wish list, and then I will wait and see more about it when it comes out to see if it's something that I will ultimately pick up. But yeah, so that's going to be what I'm excited about buying, waiting, or passing on. It's like got some weird screenshots too, where you can like walk around your ship, I guess. I don't know. I just want a game where I can travel planets and buy and sell commodities. All right. So that's going to be our episode with Matt. Once again, Matt, we appreciate the time and getting us through Metal Gear and all of its complexities and helping our listeners understand. If you are here listening to us because of Matt, hello, welcome to the podcast. Feel free to check out some of our other episodes as well. Matt, do you want to once again do a little bit of a shout out for where people can find you, and then we'll close out ourselves?
Yeah, I'll just make it simple this time. The easiest place to find me is anywhere on the internet, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, where I'm probably the most active, and that is at SuperGainsBros. Then I also run a video game podcast called Box Trick, as well as several others, but you can find links to all of those things on my Twitter at SuperGainsBros.
So now we'll get into our section, and we'll talk about how you can contact us, listen to us, and support us. So in order to contact us, you can send us an email at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. You can also do Seth at classicgamingbrothers.com, Zach at classicgamingbrothers.com. You can even do classicgamingbrothers at classicgamingbrothers.com. And doing so, we always appreciate feedback about episodes or ideas for new episodes, and we like talking to our fans. If you send us in feedback, you'll be entered in to win a free game, and it's just a bunch of games that we have, and you can pick from the list, or not. You don't need to win a free game. It's like free donut day, you know? You don't need to take the donut, but It's there. And if there's contact us, listen to us. If you can listen to us throughout all, you could go to our website to also contact us at classicgamingbrothers.com. You can go to the contact us and go through the form and send us, which also sends us an email. On that website, you can also head over to the lounge, and there is one of our players there where you can listen to every episode there. And if you don't want to listen to us on the browser because it's not 1998, you can also go through any other podcasting app and search for us, Classic Gaming Brothers. We're on most of them, so specifically like Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, and you can just find us there. And in order to supporting us, listening to us, you're doing it right there. That's pretty much good for us to support us, is give us that listen. Matt told us we should tell you to review us as well, especially on iTunes. Always do the review. So if you enjoy the podcast and you want to support us, drop us a review on iTunes. You can also follow us on all of our social medias and give us likes, ring bells, notifications. Our Facebook, our Instagram, and Twitch are at Classic Gaming Brothers. So our Facebook, Instagram are Classic Gaming Brothers. Our Twitch is twitch.tv/Classic Gaming Brothers. And our Twitter is CG Brothers Pod. And we will announce all of our episodes where, I guess, on our summer break, where we don't put out any other social media content beyond our episode releases.
Just our normal.
Because we are just
our summer break. If we do it all the time.
We were on winter break before, so now we're on summer break. It's a rolling break. We're just always on vacation. But we do release every episode every Sunday. So every Sunday you can expect to see content. You may see other content. You may even see us play games on Twitch. Who knows? We're wild and crazy. Maybe one day we'll play games on Twitch with SuperGainsBros. Who knows? And so there's that. Without further ado, Zachary, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Zach.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Matt.
We've been the Classic Gaming Brothers and Matt.
That's
right. Now, see, this is where we then go and switch into our... Oh, we could do a Game of Thrones podcast now, right now. All right, so...
Wow, Season 8.
Season 8.